interested in Europe between, there was a massive swell of this demonstration during the May Day, sort of the precarious May Day. So it was also reclaiming May Day from the kind of old left into something new. And it was really their ability to organize in an interesting way in terms of more situationist, more tactical, more horizontal, more playful. And so I really wish to see this happen, something like this happening here in the US. I feel like we have some interesting kind of unions that are doing campaigns, but still sort of using the old repertoire of the big march and the rally, the speaker, and wear the button. And I feel like the commentariat in Europe was doing like video games, temporary occupations, rave style, music parades, and something that happened every year, Milan, Berlin, London, Paris. So it was very international, but also very much connected and based on this idea of mobility, geographical mobility of this group of people. So if it's through the contemporary cognitive capitalism in asking everybody to be flexible, to move, it's not an upward mobility as much as a geographical mobility, right? It's not social. So why don't we use that to our advantage, right? This ability of moving free. So I want to say also that the other realization of this group of activists was also that the form of alienation from labor and from work were different. So it was, for example, the whole issues of intellectual ownership of the work we do. The fact that the university owns the material of our online lecture, for example, or the copywriting campaigns, those are really key. Online learning, this kind of degradation, not just of the quality of the work and the product, but also of this not having any control on not just the conditions, but really the outcomes of our work. So that's the other point that I think we should really take into consideration seriously and connected with the rising student debt, right? If you think from the 70s, the student tuition went up more than 1,000%. Where did the money go if in the same time the professoriate, the lumpen professoriate is now basically being paid $2,000 per class. So we're looking at this contingentization from both sides that are stunting an entire generation. Right? The student generation, especially in Europe, you may know, the 18 to 30 year of age have something like 33% unemployment rate. Southern Europe, I'm talking, Spain, 30%. They live at home, they only have dead-end jobs. But also the generation like mine that entered this privileged sector of culture or creative work, but still is not able to really go anywhere. It's still a kind of dead-end job. So the level of autonomy or self-determination that Hillary was talking about are also at stake here. There is no self-determination, it's just jumping from one job to the next. Right? The other thing is everything has to be not just the sense of being disposable, but also the sense that everything is being planned on a short-term basis. So the time frame is having an effect. It's having an effect on people's lives. For example, even like buying housing, setting up a family, which are like the core values of like Southern European society. This stuff is not happening because of this situation. And it becomes a sort of alienation from life itself, right? Not just alienation to work, because when you cannot distinguish between life and work, because everything you do is creative work anyway, everything is like in this kind of discourse of self-promotion, of your being this subject that is constantly working on investing, and in this kind of startup mode of cognitive capitalism. Material labor is not measured by what you do, but is measured in the potentiality of how investable you are as a social subject. So essentially it's also about your life becoming part of a process of colonization, which all the activities become monetizable through the number of links you have, number of social content you have on Facebook. Right? This quantification of big data is also converging into a sort of quantification of the value of a person. Right? So an adjunct with the label of the adjunct is already, in a way, a proletariat just because of that label. Right? It has nothing to do with the personal qualities, but it is quantified already. So that those kind of questions are raised by cognitive capitalism and by the fact that this shift is only possible with also a new sector of service workers. Actually makes me think that it makes a lot of sense that the unions that are in the US organizing the adjuncts are also the unions that have organized the service workers. Some of that one. So I actually find it really positive and really interesting that there is this mutual recognition of precarity and of disposability, both at the kind of very top of the educational levels and at the very bottom in terms of understanding that we are both fundamental to this new model of capitalism, but at the same time completely treated as disposable with race to the bottom. So I find these recent campaigns, for example, the Bay Area is worse than most places in the country, I think with New York City and Boston in terms of the number of PhDs in the total population. So the kind of competitiveness of the market make it easier for institutions to keep churning and creating this kind of race to the bottom. The same is true for immigrants, right? For domestic workers, for immigrants that just come across the border and up in LA or in San Francisco and can always find work as a domestic worker. The problem is where does this live? It's always going to be a short-term, temporary problem of vision. So in that sense, it is the classic liberal model of capitalism, of the Adam Smith kind of scenario. And we really have to start thinking about how to articulate these needs and these rights in a new way. So on one level, yes, of course, the union is needed to ask for the $15 per hour. But that is definitely not addressing the kind of new rights that are needed because it's an old type of demand. Right? How do you quantify the amount of work per hour that a caregiver gives? Right? Well, how do you quantify affective labor? How do you quantify cognitive labor? You cannot boil it down to something like that. So we really have to think, and I would like from this crowd to hear some ideas of how new rights can be thought of. Some proposal that I have is, of course, to think of the commons, right? So to stop this appropriation of copyright, but also of space. As you can see, San Francisco gentrification is a kind of making it impossible for most people to live in the city. So to think of right of spatial and cognitive and intellectual commons, to think of the right to the city, as Miriam has said, because the ultimate creativity depends on this kind of access to culturally rich, diverse nodes, urban areas, but also more in a European style, an Italian style, is like the kind of right to a citizen universal income. Right now, the California economy is going very strong, so it could be a lot more possible here than in Italy, I would say. But also, what I really want to emphasize is also the need to, the right to health, not some kind of like Robert California thing that's really expensive. Something beyond that. The right to recognizing reproductive work in the picture of health as a social and socialized health. And of course, in thinking of immigration, the right to mobility, but also the right to creative time. The right to time that's not devoted to this colonization of the self and activities that are designed to make one's online identity sellable. I think this is something we really need to think of. I'm going to leave it there, and I hope this will be good material for discussion. Thank you.